When I began to study Vittore Gambello, I encountered an extraordinary multifaceted sculptor. Some ancient sources describe him as a stone sculptor, for instance, the tramezzo in the church of Santo Stefano in Venice, after he had been educated by his father Antonio, sculptor and architect, during the years of the San Zaccaria building site. Apparently, Vittore subsequently worked in the Venetian Mint, developing at the same time a personal production of medals and bronze statuette. Some things seemed to be controversial. Products and techniques differed enormously one from another. A complete revision of documents, both published and unpublished, enabled to outline his family history. This began with his father's work. He wasn't a sculptor, but actually an engineer specialized in submerged foundation of buildings. Antonio Gambello was in charge of the building site of San Zaccaria's church from 1458, especially of the facade foundation, particularly complicated, being very high and heavy when compared to other Venetian churches. He then became a military engineer for the Serenissima, working on the mainland, for instance, the castle of Legnago near Verona, built on the Adige River, as well as the Lido in Venice. He developed the Sant'Andrea fortress, and in 1477 he passed away during a mission in Greece, presumably killed by the Ottomans. He was therefore not a sculptor, nor did he teach his children the art of stone sculpture. Antonio had several sons who were given unusual names for that time: Briamonte, Ruggero, and Vittore, called Camelio. All seems related with the chivalry poems which Antonio probably had read. His children's education is completely unknown. They presumably attended the local reading and counting schools. Antonio decided to make them acquire technical skills pertaining to the precious metal business, probably safer and economically more successful than his career, the latter no longer profitable because of Lombard craftsmen who had been dominating the field since 1460. Since Antonio was employed by the state when he died during the service, the Venetian Republic provided for his family's financial need. First, his wife received a grant for the children as soon as they became old enough to work for public administration. Then, both Briamonte and Ruggero were employed as ballottini, young boys who helped during Venetian elections. On the other hand, Vittore was employed by the Mint, an institution dominated by some family groups who would pass the position from father to son, such as the Sestos, in the Mint since 1395, or the Grifos from Ferrara. In 1484, the Senate decided to organize a contest to find new expert talents to engrave coin dies. Both Vittore Gambello and Alessandro Leopardi, the founder of Colleoni's equestrian statue modeled by Verrocchio, were employed in the Mint. It is not known where Camelio learned to engrave. However, according to documents of the time, his brother Briamonte is called gemmarius, gem cutter and engraver, expertise very similar to steel die cutting. Most, probably both brothers, had been educated by goldsmiths and jewelers of the Rialto district. Jewelers' training was extremely long, and consequently they were able to become independent only after 9 years. In 1484, at the age of 24, Vittore started working for the Mint, where he remained until 1526, that is to say, for 42 years. The die maestro occupation did not fill his entire working day, so Camelio became involved in medals modeling, both for the doges, hence institutional object, and for private Venetian citizens, such as the Bellini brothers. The importance of Camelio's work consisted mainly in passing the coinage technique from the creation of coins to that of medals. Before him, hybrid objects, half coins and half medals, had been created by some medallists who were also Mint employees. For example, Gianfrancesco Inzola from Parma created some struck foundation medals that had the same shape, size, and metal of current coins. Camelio understood the potential of creating dies to strike bronze medals when there was the need to produce a huge amount of medals for Doge Agostino Barbarigo, probably used as gift for the Venetian patricians during the magnificent celebration organized by the Republic several times a year. Struck rather than cast medals were produced more rapidly. In fact, it was much easier to strike the metal disc with dies and hammer rather than cast several pieces that involved producing a number of molds and then debarring every single medal. Medals could be struck in silver, gold, or bronze, less expensive. However, the technique involved a number of mandatory specifications: a rather small size, maximum 3 centimeters, and very thin relief, extremely different from the 15th century cast medals. Striking was not a technique used exclusively to create coins in the Renaissance, but it was also employed in ancient times for the same purpose. In the 15th century, humanists began to collect objects such as these, the cost of which reached considerable amounts since they represented a glorious past. In the early 16th century, the fact that these ancient items were actually currency was unknown. They were considered celebrative medals, similarly to the objects created by Pisanello or Sperandio in the Quattrocento. Camaglio therefore brought back in use the original striking technique used in ancient times to make medals in bronze. Vittore did not reproduce identical ancient coins, but invented a brand new kind of object, that is to say, an ancient-style medal. This was a sort of round dual-faced plaquette, recalling ancient history through shapes and characters inspired by history and reliefs. His first all'antica medal in 1508 was his own portrait, in which he appears depicted with a nude cat bust, like the Roman emperors in ancient coins. On the reverse, he created a scene of sacrifice with satyr, god, and putti, evoking an archaic work that in the early 16th century populated painting, sculpture, and prints. Vittore struck medals all'antica depicting Augustus on one side and Mercury on the other, or Cleopatra and Apollo, or an unusual object such as the latter, in which recto and verso are not even recognizable. This is a round plaquette which narrates the story of a sacrifice from the moment when the man lifts the deer for the offering, surrounded by satyrs and cherubs playing with masks, to the minute description of the altar with a brazier, a goat, some weapons, and an arbor semper vivum, which was typical of ancient gems. Despite this flourishing trade of all'antica items, the Venetian economic situation between 1508 and 1510 was rather serious. All the Italian states were against the Serenissima during the wars of the Cambrai League. The Mint reduced the salaries of his workers to the extent that Camaglio could not afford to work there any longer. In 1509, Vittore addressed the Serenissima Senate, forwarding a request for a patent. He had, in fact, developed a method to create particularly lightweight and resistant armors, useful in the wars Venice was fighting against the rest of Italy. The Senate granted him the patent, and the creation was immediately implemented. Once again, Camaglio proved to be an experimenter in the field of metalworking. In 1510, he wrote a letter to a friend and patron of his, Pier Matteo Giordani from Pesaro, sending him some of his all'antica medals and telling him that he could no longer remain in Venice, since the situation had become difficult. He intended to reach the sanctuary of Santa Casa in Loreto, where it's known that Cristoforo Foppa, called Caradosso, the important medalist in Milan, was working, and Gian Cristoforo Romano would have arrived in the following year. Marche was simply a step towards Rome, final destination of Camaglio's journey. Presumably around 1512, perhaps following the Venetian Cardinal Domenico Grimani, for whom Camaglio cast a medal, Vittore moved to Rome, where there was a considerable community of Venetians and where he had contact with jewelers, such as Geronimo Borgi, as proved by a letter written in 1509. Once he reached Rome, Camaglio understood the need to approach the Pope and his circle as soon as possible, since his aim was to work in the Papal Mint, at the time under the control of the German bankers Fugger. The perfect occasion arose in September 1513. The Pope's collaborators were looking for someone who could create the medals for Giuliano de' Medici, nephew of Leo X, to be distributed during the celebration of his appointment as a Roman citizen in Capitol. Camaglio modeled small medals featuring on one side Giuliano's head. The same profile will be later sculpted by Michelangelo in the Medician tombs in San Lorenzo in Florence. And on the other hand, a personification of victorious Rome, inspired by ancient coins. These medals were given out to the audience during the plays, and on the same occasion, he cast a beautiful medal with Giuliano and Virtue shaking hands with Fortune, probably given to a smaller circle of guests. In June 1515, Camellio finally became engraver for the Pope's dies, together with his colleague Pier Maria Serbaldi from Pescia, a well-known engraver of precious stones. Vittore resided in Rome for 2 years, until July 1517, when he received his last wages, and in December of the same year, he was back in the Venice Mint. The Roman years changed Camellio's style. Up to 1510, he drew inspiration from prints by Nordic artists such as Jacopo de' Barbari. After his experience in Rome, he was influenced by archaeological pieces of art and Renaissance masters like Raffaello. Some of the medals cast in the 20s have a completely different style compared to the early medals. Figures have more volume and fuller garments clothe characters who look more and more like ancient statues. Even in struck medals, he does not forget what he experienced in Rome, concentrating probably more on pictorial models rather than sculptural ones. It is, however, in a field completely different from medals that Camellio show is dabbed with Roman antiquities. In 1523, his brother Briamonte wrote his first will, leaving 40 ducats for his tomb, to be built in the church of Santa Maria della Carità in Venice. Camellio designed his brother's funerary monument according to the style of 13th century Venetian arch, but with decoration similar to an ancient sarcophagus, hence imitating those he had seen in Rome. He modeled 2 sculptures for the tomb. They were probably cast in the workshop of Campanato family, with whom Camellio's family was related through a marriage. The 2 plaques visible in the Venetian Cadore Museum today are signed exactly in the same way as Camellio signed his medals. The first plaque shows a clear relationship with the print of Pollaiolo, illustrating the same subject, whose copies were circulating in Venice and Padua already at the end of the 15th century. The man with the bow is taken from the print and turned, and all the movements of arms holding weapons are clearly related. The kind of scene reminds us of some Roman sarcophagus discovered during the Renaissance, like the one with the Labors of Hercules now in the National Roman Museum of Alten Palace. Another probable source of inspiration could be the famous group of Laocoon with this son, found in 1606 in Rome under a vineyard in the Oppio Hill. Camellio not only could have seen the original statue, but also the bronze version cast by Sansovino between 1510 and 1520 and property of Domenico Grimani, who we knew from the time of the medal we have seen before. Some features in the faces of young and old men in Camellio's scene remind us of Laocoon and his son. The curly hair so well defined, the long wavy beards, and some features of the younger man could be related. A source of inspiration could have also come from a Roman sarcophagus property of Pope Julius II and exposed in the Vatican Palace in the octagon called Cortile delle Statue. In this sarcophagus, 2 little angels are carrying a shield with an icon resembling a Medusa head, really similar to the head hanging in the arms of Camellio warriors. For the second plaque, the one with the nude men and knights, an inspiration probably came from the fountain created in the Renaissance, assembling the personification of the river Arno and a sarcophagus with a battle of Greeks against Amazons, discovered in the first year of 16th century and property of Pope Leo X. The knights and the foot soldiers are fighting holding different kinds of weapons. Some poses of the horses, some nude figures, and the sense of movement in the bronze version could be related to the ancient sarcophagus. But maybe the immediate quote from the antiquity is in the man who is kneeling down in the center of the plaque. These mature man's arms suggest that he was probably holding a bow. There is a hole in his right hand. But if we concentrate only on his chest, we instantly think of one of the most important ancient sculptures found in Rome in the Renaissance, the torso of Belvedere. It was a fragmentary Greek statue signed by the Apollonius from Athens, found around Campo dei Fiori during the pontificate of Julius II. For years, it was property of the Venetian sculptor Andrea Bregno, and then was moved to the Vatican collection. The sculpture became famous immediately for its sense of tension and mystery. Camellio was in Rome during the reign of Pope Leo X. He surely saw the statue, and he reused the chest contraction and that cutting of legs in the center of his last work. According to scholars, from the end of the 19th century to nowadays, a considerable number of bronze statuettes were ascribed to Camellio, owing to their resemblance to the Venetian plaques. In my opinion, none of these can be surely to be considered part of Vittore catalogue. This Hercules of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford has nothing to share with the nudes in the signed relief. Muscles, hair, and birds are reproduced in an entirely different manner. The same can be said of this Hercules in San Francisco, this Hercules with lion in Cleveland, or this nude carrying a jar in Berlin. They all differ from one another and from the Venetian bronzes. The only small bronze that can probably be classified as a work by Camellio is the Hercules in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. The posture and the definition of muscles are very similar in both works of art. Until when a signed bronze or documentary evidence of this activity as modeler of small statuettes come to light, I believe it's necessary to limit Camellio's catalogue to the plaques created for his brother's sarcophagus. Camellio died in Venice in 1537 and was buried in the tomb he had created for his brothers. Late 19th century critics ascribed to Camellio an excessive number of works. However, Enea Vico, the numismatic expert, carved gems collector, and engraver from Parma, in 1555 highlighted Camellio's most important skill. He was the first, in Vico's list of experts, to create new steel dies imitating ancient techniques.